Hey, this is Eamon from Anyone Can Book a Gig, and welcome to our second episode of the Meet the Pros interview series. Today we're talking with tour manager and audio engineer Paul Boothe, who has been managing tours since the 1980s. The episode opens with a deep dive into his experience in his career, but he's worked with artists like Tony Williams, where he got his start, and has been the go-to manager for Joshua Redman, Dianne Reeves, and some other artists since the early 2000s. So he has a lot to say on the vocation of tour managing, a lot of nuggets of information to take away, and I hope you enjoy. I'll see you after the interview.
Welcome, everybody, to episode number 2 of the Meet the Pros podcast series. My name is Matt DeLeon. I'm an agent and education manager for MusicWorks International. I'm joined by Eamon Laughlin, creative director of MusicWorks International, and our very special guest, Paul Boothe, joining us live from Austin, Texas today. Paul is a road manager, sound engineer, that began his career in the late 80s and has worked with everybody. So it's an honor to have Paul on the podcast today to talk to us about all things tour managing, sound engineering, and the broad category of what it takes to make sure that a tour is successful. And we're going to be diving into the various facets of that. So thank you very much, Paul, for joining us. It's an honor to have you. Paul and I met, I think, for the first time in 2017 when I was still working at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and we were doing Dianne Reeves Valentine's Day concerts every year. So it's been quite a while since we've seen each other, but it's great to see you this morning, and thank you again.
Well, thanks for inviting me on this podcast. I'm excited to share what I can.
Cool. So to get started, how about you just give us an overview of your career thus far and just some highlights and what it's been like over the past several decades working with this illustrious group of artists and traveling the world.
Well, first, I'd like to start off by saying that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I've been very blessed to not work really a day in my life. It's been a passion of mine to be in the music, a part of the music since I was 8 years old. I had various methods for that. I started out in third grade, living my parents' dream of being a musician. They actually were musicians and music majors, but then immediately took left turns and went in different careers and didn't use music pretty much their whole life. So enter their children. They asked me what instrument I wanted. I told them I wanted to play drums. He says, okay, cello's perfect. And so cello was my mother's favorite instrument. I started playing in a public school string program that existed at the time in Texas. And I was lucky. I had some innate talent, gifts from my folks, I suspect. So I excelled without a lot of effort in the beginning, which wasn't necessarily a good thing. I decided after I graduated high school that I would not continue to college. So I started the band, and the band that I started, we lasted 4 years before politics, internal politics of the group caused it to explode. We ended up in Seattle, Washington, and at which time I was doing absolutely nothing, and remembered my parents saying they would help me with my education if I ever chose to. So I went to a school called Cornish Institute. Now, as a cellist in a rock band, because I'm not a rhythm section player, I had plenty of time to walk around the club and listen to the music that was coming from our little cheap PA that we bought. And so that was my first experience twiddling knobs. I had no experience other than just pulling it out of a box and plugging it in. But it was, but I had the ears that I'd been training for many years, which were turned out much later to be a critical aspect of my success. So anyway, I did that, and then the band broke up. I went to Cornish Institute of Allied Arts in Seattle on Capitol Hill. Did that for a couple of years. Was hired as a assistant administrator for the jazz program by a wonderful man named Julian Priester, trombonist, and I worked closely with Julian Priester and in the jazz program. Most of my duties were taking care of the little sound system that they had and some clerical stuff, but I would mix senior recitals and different things like that. So I was getting my hands a little more wet, still playing, not thinking I was going to do anything other than play. Seattle it became time for me to leave Seattle. A friend who had graduated previously, the previous year, had moved back to Boston where he lived. And I thought, Boston, well, maybe I can go out there and try my hand at another conservatory, New England or Berkeley or something like that. So I moved out there. After a couple of months on his sofa, he was like, dude, you got to pay some money for this. I can't afford to keep you. So I was looking in the back of the Entertainment Rag, and I believe that magazine probably still exists in Boston. I can't recall the name, but so I saw Sound Man Wanted. I'm like, bing, I can do that. So much easier than I can make coffee or sling burgers. So I went out to the audition, failed miserably, but I was able to endear myself to the engineer that was leaving. And he took me under his wing and told me some tricks, how to get the PA that the band that I was being hired to work with, how to get it to sound bigger than it really was. And that helped me. And I went to work for that band. It was a Soul Review, and we worked 6 nights a week in clubs across Canada and the Northeast. And it was a great experience, hard work, and next to no money. But I learned a lot I learned some bad habits and some good habits with audio, working with those guys. After a couple of years, I was a little bit tired and decided to try my hand at an event services company. This is a company that had sound and lights and sports timing and power distribution. They did pretty much everything for events, tents, all kinds of stuff. So I worked in their dungeon making cables for the first year because they realized when I came in and interviewed me that I didn't have really any technical background. So they gave me about a year in the dungeon. I was making cables and watching repairs of equipment and starting to get my hands around what an electron was. And then started working in the warehouse, pushing speakers around, loading trucks, doing the hard work. This is in my late 20s at something like that. Still had a good, strong body. And then they started putting me on shows after 6-8 months, a year in the warehouse. It's about 2 years into this company. Once I started doing shows, they did a lot of industrials working for corporate events, teacher meetings, some ribbon cutting ceremonies, things like that. That's where I started. It was once they saw that I actually had some ears to go along with this fledgling knowledge that I had received from them, I started moving up pretty quickly, and I was lucky enough to be able to do some. The company had Boston Pops, which is a orchestra that does popular music with usually soloists, and I was very lucky, and I was able to mix some of those outdoor shows with them, do a lot more music. About 1985, I was freelance for this event services company from like 84 and 85, maybe into 86. I got a job at a nightclub in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That was a The guy, it was pretty new when I started there, and I quickly became production manager. It was a small club, 250 seats, and the owner's dream was to have a 7 night a week Delta Blues or blues club for national touring acts. And I didn't really sell that many tickets in the Cambridge area at that time. So he started working with other artists and or bringing in other artists, some Americana, which didn't exist at the time, but that style of music and or at least that label didn't exist, and jazz and I had a real affinity for jazz music, so I really enjoyed those concerts. I met a man named Scott Southard who was at the time a manager. He was manager of Michael Brecker, I think, at the time. And he would come in and four-wall the club, which meant just renting it out and taking care of the box office himself. And he did a few shows there, and he liked what I did audio-wise with his bands. A couple of years later, I get a call from Scott saying that he's putting a band in Behind the Iron Curtain on a USIA tour, which is a cultural exchange program that the United States government had at the time. And so the first band I went out with as strictly a engineer was Randy Brecker. And the U.S. government put out a small PA with these bands that would go over there. They did mostly folk and jazz, in sort of indigenous American music. And they had a small Bose PA and some guitar amps, drum set, and stuff like that. That was my job. The road manager were retired State Department officials. I'm like, wow, that's a heck of a bonus you guys get after, because these guys were working hard going through these communist countries. So I did that for the first year and got good reports, I guess Scott did from the band. And then I went back and was doing what I was doing previous. And then the next year I got another call from Scott, and he's putting with the same USIA tour, John Faddis, trumpet player, fantastic trumpet player. Also, so was Randy, both of them. But when I went out with Faddis, I became friends with Renee Rossness, who was playing piano for John Faddis. That tour also was a success. About 4 months later, Renee, the story goes, I wasn't there, but Renee was in her manager's office, a woman named Marianne Topper, who ran the Jazz Tree, who was a fantastic manager and creator of careers for young musicians. She was really wonderful at getting people off the ground and getting them started working. People like Joshua Redman, Christian McBride, Diana Krall, a lot of different folks, all of which I worked with on and off in their early years. Renee was in the office, and Tony Williams, who was Marianne Topper's client at the time, his road manager called up and said, and Tony had a tour scheduled, I think it was 10 days or something in Tokyo, his first time back since he had been there with Miles in 1963. And there was reasons for that I won't go into, but this was his first tour back to Japan in 20 some odd years. There was a lot of excitement. His road manager called up Marianne while Renee was there and said, I can't make the tour. And he had other commitments. Marianne was really freaked out. Renee said, oh, I know a guy, and gave her my name. Marianne called me, and I'm like, Tony Williams, are you kidding? Of course I'm going. Tony also had been estranged from his father, and this is common knowledge in a lot of books about Tony. For most of his life, his father, unfortunately, had been just diagnosed with a terminal illness. And so Tony wanted to bring his father to Japan with him to get back and to clear the air and all of that, which he did. And they had a fantastic time. And the band and Tony really enjoyed what I did. Tony was a very loyal guy, so he went back to his tour manager when he became available. But until Tony passed away, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I was his main sub. So that when the tour manager wasn't able to make gigs, they would call me. And with the success of that, with that tour, Tony took me under his wing and taught me how. But at that time, I hadn't done any tour managing at all, road managing, anything. So I was green is kind of an understatement. So Tony realized that quickly, and he said, "Well, here, let me show you what you got to do." And he proceeded to show me how to get mad and how to control your emotions when people aren't doing what you say, but how to look like crazed. How to get your point across in his inimitable style. I think that's the word. Tony was larger than life oftentimes, and a wonderful guy. When the stage lights went off, he was a wonderful guy on stage too. Obviously, that's not necessary for me to comment on, but behind the scenes, he was also a really terrific person. So I worked on and off for Tony for about 4 years. During that time, Marianne liked what I did so much, she started handing me some of her other clients. So about that time, I think this was 1988 when I went with Tony. Marianne says, what are you doing? I ended up quitting most of my work in Boston with the club and I did give up the club, and I stopped doing a lot of work with the event services company, and was doing road managing and sound, sort of an everything man, a combination. Because in jazz music, the money is different. Not that it's less or more. It's just how the money is approached. The artists want to put money in their pocket. They're not supported by labels as much. Back in those days, maybe there was a few people that were getting tour support, but not very many. So they couldn't afford large crews. They couldn't afford to have a tour manager and a sound guy and a lighting guy and all of that. Now, there were a few jazz bands that could, but majority of them didn't have that kind of a budget. So I found this little niche of sort of being a jack of all trades in the production and logistics to support artists. And worked with Stanley Jordan during those periods. For about 4 years, I worked with a vocal group named New York Voices. There were others that I was working with as well during this time. 1988 was the year that it changed for me to doing that. Since then, I haven't really done anything else except that. I've worked for some fabulous, wonderful people and musicians. You mentioned, I believe, Dianne Reeves. Dianne, I've been with 20 years now. I started with her in 2004. I've worked for Joshua Redman. Joshua was one of those clients from Marianne Topper. She went to find to a competition, monk competition to be exact, and the year that Josh won it. And she got Josh a record deal on Warner or assisted in that process and got him working nonstop. And I had done a couple of jobs with him, and he enjoyed what I did and said as soon as he could afford me, he'd hire me full time. Right towards the end of my Stanley Jordan career, he called me up and says, "I'm ready. Are you ready for Europe in the spring? Because we're going full on from that point on." I'm like, "Sure." So I was full time for Josh for probably the first 5 years. Didn't work really with anyone else because his career was quite busy at the time. So did that. Worked and Josh started to slow down. More time became available. I started working with some different bands that my friend Scott Southard, pulling that name up. He's now become one of the top jazz agents by that time. Still is in the world, really, I think. And So he was doing a lot of bringing of world music into the U.S. besides being an agent for the artists and taking and booking gigs for them around the world. He brought in bands like Buena Vista Social Club. He was involved in that project pretty much from day one. He brought in others, Youssou N'Dour, a wonderful Senegalese singer, and Tarafta Hajduk, a wonderful band from Romania. And I was lucky enough to be tour manager on all of those. I didn't do much production on those shows, although I did for Taraf, but it was great fun and a great experience. And then met Herbie, another Scott gig. I was asked to road manage Directions in Music, which was Roy Hargrove, Herbie Hancock, and Michael Brecker, along with bass player and drummer. The year that I worked with him, it was George Mraz on bass and Willie Jones the third on drums. So I did that, and I met Herbie, and I met Michael, and I met Michael's manager, a gentleman named Daryl Pitt, who's now managing Dianne Reeves. And sort of you're seeing maybe some names cross in different areas, and that's kind of how this business works. I made my name in one area. Somebody learned about me. They moved me from different places when I had the opportunity to take the work. And so I worked for Herbie for a little while. I worked for Michael Brecker for about the last 3 or 4 years until he passed. I met Dianne through Daryl, started working with her, and have been nonstop with Dianne ever since. I do all of her logistic work, all of her travel, all of the office work for her for touring, and go when I can to as the sound engineer and tour manager. Same thing with Josh. So Josh and Dianne have been my two clients for the last 20 years. Josh, as I mentioned, longer, but I work for both of them, and I try and hopefully some years it's like this and I can do a lot of work. Other years it's like this and I have to hire a lot of subs for the other one, because I'm doing, to keep it consistent, I do all the advance for all of my artists. So that way it's, even if there's a different person in my shoes on the road, the advance is the same. They know where to look to find information. They know who to go to. There's not, and it's been a good way for me to hold on to some wonderful clients that I can't always support in all aspects of my job. I think that's about it.
Incredible. I really appreciated hearing about how Tony Williams took you under his wing.
Yeah.
Very timely, because, as just having a personal example, as I'm getting into this world of artist management and tour management, I'm learning the minutia of what it takes to be on the road. And something that I was talking about with an artist that I'm tour managing is the theatrics of it all, because I know a lot of people, including myself, are gentle as people, but we were talking about like these learning curves and theatrics that you have to kind of put on to be able to get things done and deal with so many different personalities. So I was wondering if you could talk about any learning curves you've had and what that early experience was like, because I know that I'm sure you have a ton.
I was, you know, I don't want to blame anybody for my behavior and how it's gone since I met Tony, but I was Mr. Nice Guy. You know, I was coming from sound was the closest I had gotten, and I'm, as a sound engineer, I'm beholding to the artist and their wishes, not necessarily my wishes. I have to make it sound good for them, and sometimes that doesn't always agree. But I was wet behind the ears. Maybe that's a good term for it. When I met Tony, and I had to learn how to be strong, how to be determined, how to get my point across without alienating people. It doesn't always work. So, that's one that I've struggled with. Sometimes I do alienate people, and it's really the bane of my existence. I think about what I do at the end of each day, what interactions I had with people. I've been doing that since I was a child. It's just something I do. It's not really anything I was taught, I don't think. But it's just I look at that, and sometimes it's great. Other times I'm extremely embarrassed with my behavior. But it was a challenge to, it was acting in the beginning. I had to read a script, even though it was a script in my own head, but I had to read a script to do that. I had to put on airs. After you do that for a while, we're talking 30 years of doing that, it becomes ingrained in your psyche. You don't have to try that hard. In fact, what you have to try and do is control that, because it can take over, that angst, that anger, that everything is out to get me, and thing, and that's what it can turn into. So learning how to control that, and probably keeping it an act, would be something to aspire to. I didn't really. It has become part of me. Now, that's in my professional life. In my personal life, it has affected my personal life to some extent. I go to the grocery store. If they don't have milk, I'll let the guy know, why don't you have milk? And it's like, oops, I'm road managing the milk run. So I have to be careful with that. And I go back to Tony. Tony was really the one that opened my eyes to that methodology, and God bless him for that, because it's allowed me to function in a real world where you've got a gate agent and you got a band standing behind you of 6, 10, 15, 20, however many people it is. And as you this happened to me last year, as I get off the plane, they canceled our tickets on the connection. We were somewhere in Europe. And so I went to the gate agent, and I'm like, and the plane was not late or anything like that. They just decided to put us on a later flight, and which wouldn't allow me to get to the gig. So I had to really balance ripping this guy a new face, or but yet not losing him as an ally, which, I mean, he was forced into being an ally, but ultimately we got everybody on the plane. But it was touch and go, and the band that I was with, they were all, when I told them, get on the plane now, their eyes were all pie-eyed. They were, because they had witnessed me in my full embarrassing glory of aggressive behavior, and but it worked. It worked that time. I had to call for the little trick. When you've got somebody that's being inflexible in front of you, ask to see their supervisor. And as soon as there's, and you, if you're like this and you're mad at them, as soon as that supervisor comes, hey, so we've been having some discussions with your client who's been, with your employee who's really been working hard for the company. Thank you, just effusive, and because you need that supervisor to kind of be on your side without undercutting, directly his employee who's standing right next to you, who's fuming mad about how our last however long our encounters have lasted. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you can really deal with any number of problems that can come up at any time. How do you kind of manage the stress of that and the realities of being on the road that might not be this glamorous experience, and just maintain kind of emotional sustainability over, a multi-week tour or over a career on the road?
Well, add to that not only the stress, but add to that lack of sleep, which is something that everybody that's been on even a vacation realizes that, when you're out there traveling for vacation or for professional reasons, sleep is tough to get unless you really plan for it. And the artists that I work for, they're out there to make money, not to sleep. They're not necessarily taking. Now, some are. Some artists are able to say, look, I'm not going to work more than 2 days without at least a travel day or a day off, and that's great. Those clients are few and far between, though, because and they're probably getting paid pretty well, because it takes a lot of money to keep a band on the road. People get paid every day. They have to eat, so they get per diems every day, and that's coming out of the fees that the artist is getting. Hopefully it's not coming out of their bank account at home because they've gone over their budget. But fatigue, the pressures, as you mentioned, of all of these, sometimes acting, or some maybe if you've internalized it, this behavior that you sometimes need. Really, rest is the only way to deal with it. I go back to what I said about looking at every interaction that I've had. Briefly, I'm not talking about long term studying of my behavior at the end of the day, but just rolling over and kind of making a list. Okay, that one was a good one, now is a bad one, and see how I'm doing on the balance between what I think is a good rapport with the people I deal with daily. And I think that's something that's done by a lot of people in a lot of different situations. But yeah, having a loving partner at home that understands is really, really critical, or a good friend that understands, or somebody that gets it, so that you can vent. Because venting is really important. It's important not to vent to your clients. I learned that a hard way a few times. Just zip it, and put a smile on and say, "Yeah, everything's fine. It's great." Because you want your clients to be relaxed. That's the ultimate goal. Because when they're relaxed, they can perform to their highest level. And if they're stressed about getting to the next gig, or what happened this morning getting to that gig, then they're not going to. Most won't give their be able to give the best of themselves.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off that question, I might be asking the same thing again, but a lot on the road is catering to the needs of others. So I'm wondering if there's any tips that you've learned along the way of like how to maintain a self-care routine to be able to give to other people.
Self-care. Well, if you saw my physique, you would probably rephrase that frame. Although you know me, Matt. So self-care. I find that good meals are critical. While you're on the road, a lot of artists find really want to have band meals so that there's a social time as opposed to just making it a work environment. Not everyone. Sometimes you work for bands and the last thing people want to do is be around other band members or the crew, which is fine. That's their routine, and you need to, as a road manager, facilitate that to make that something that works for them, and not guilt them into thinking, the crew's going out, the band's going out, come with us. No, you need to be able to be sensitive to the different methodologies of the people that you're working with. That help?
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it's important to just get to know each artist and their different complexities of their own personalities, needs, and wants.
And that takes time to be able to get that from some artists. Some artists are an open book. Some people are an open book, and they're easy to understand regardless of their behavior. That behavior can be easy to understand, although it's a slippery slope because I don't really know that person that well to know why they're the way they are, what the circumstance was that brought them to where they are today. Um, but I try and be as sympathetic without being condescending. And if they throw out some wacky no brown M&Ms in the rider, I'll say, hey, no problem. I hate brown M&Ms too. And I may go to my vent partner and say, what the heck? But it's important to them for whatever reason. Then I feel it's my duty to, especially if they're signing the checks. Some band members like to take advantage of the care that I offer. And there are lines that I have for band members. First off, if it's going to cost the artist for that care, it's going to have to. I'm going to have to run it by the artist if it's going to cost money. But I try and be as fair as I can. And put as much money in the bank as I can for the artists that are hiring me, because ultimately they're out there for the work and to continue to have a lifestyle that they want, and to do that, that's money. That it's a tricky thing to say because a lot of people disagree with me. Oh no, it's not about the money. Well, okay, it generally boils down to the money at some point. Because if you don't have money, unless you happen to be wealthy, if you're not making money from your shows, it's hard to be able to hire the right band because they cost money. And the better they are and the more in demand they are, the more they cost. So there's that. And there are expenses, lots of expenses out there for band leaders. I can tell pretty quickly sizing people up when I meet new musicians, whether they've been a band leader or not, depending on how strong they are about their comfort. Because comfort costs money generally when you're touring. And if you're a band leader, you have some sympathy, not always, but quite often some sympathy for the budget, more so than if you're just a sideman and you've only been hired to fill a position in somebody else's band. And it's always fun to see sidemen go into their band leader position, and then on the beyond that to see the change in their behavior. And sometimes it happens, not always, but it's like, oh, here he is. Now he's a nice guy. Now he's not asking for pistachios instead of peanuts,
So to start closing things up a little bit, this has all been great insight, Paul. Thank you so much. We have kind of a last little segment we do. We're going to try to call 3, 2, 1, where we ask for, and we can go through these one by one, but kind of 3 key takeaways for students that might be watching this that you'd want them to walk away with from your experience and your perspective.
Okay. 2
recommendations you might have for someone who wants to get into tour management, get into doing what you do. And then 1, if there's a resource, a tool, a routine that you use that might be helpful for people. So if you want to start with kind of 3 takeaways that you'd want listeners to kind of walk away with from your wealth of experience.
Well, first one would be putting money in the bank for your clients. The person that does that with aplomb, with flair, with a good attitude is going to work, because that's going to require extra effort on my behalf to look for that extra flight to see if there's to to find a methodology for saving money without it affecting the vibe of the tour. That would be definitely number one. Number two, don't expect your client to be your friend, no matter how long you work for them. There's always somebody else out there. So don't get complacent, because that complacency can cost you a job. And because the pattern will change as you work with that, your clients will see that. You need to keep that energy level you brought to the client. You need to keep that for as long as you're working for that client. They'll appreciate it. Work will get done. Now, friendly relationships, I'm not speaking about that. I'm talking about, don't expect your client to forgive you like your friend or your significant other. They're paying you to do a job, and if you're not doing it correctly, at least in their opinion, then they're going to look for somebody else. And then I think number three on that would be control as much as you can for your client. That's what I do with my two current clients, two current main clients. I have others that I work with in small projects throughout each year, but Joshua and Dianne, I take care of all of their advance all the time, so that as I mentioned earlier in the program, they know where to go to look for the information, regardless of who the boots on the ground are. And they know that they have a person that, if those boots that I happen to put in my position, like if my sub is not functioning up to the standards that my client needs, they can come to me with that, and they don't feel sort of left out when I have to do something else. So, because schedules are difficult to maintain, especially when you're taking 3 weeks to 6 weeks of time to leave your home. What about the other artists during that 3 to 6 weeks of time? If you don't control the data and the experience that all those artists are going, they're going to find somebody else, and it'll be sometimes tough to get them back as a client. So I think that's three things.
Great. The second one was kind of two recommendations for people trying to get started. Maybe they have no tour experience. Mm-hmm. What are two things that you think people should do if they're looking to get into something like this?
I would say, of course, I do a couple of different things. I mix sound and I tour manage, which are two different jobs, really, for all intents and purposes. But I combine them because I've that's one way that I am able to keep popular with my clientele. But the way to get to doing that for sound, for instance, train your ears, listen to music, try and listen inside the music. Don't just listen to the lyrics, or try and hear the inner voices in the music and start getting good at that. And you can do that just by Spotify or Apple Music or something like that with some earphones. Practice that, learn frequency, learn where that sits in the scale of things. And then once you're studying those things, which will help you early on as well as later, find a musician who's in your position as a sound engineer, somebody that's just getting started, who might have, I don't know, a high school gig or a wedding or something, and put yourself in with those people. Help them however they can. You may not charge for that, but as I started this out, this program out, I said, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So I'm assuming that nobody's going to be trying to be a sound engineer or a tour manager to get rich. So the best way to start is to volunteer. And that's going to get you some. Now you're not going to be able to necessarily volunteer for a sound company or an artist that's an established artist. They're going to want people with experience, because to move a person around, sound engineer, whatever they are, musician, is expensive. You've got hotel costs, you've got flight costs, you've got salaries, all of these things that are taking money out of the clients, the person who's paying you. So when you're young and you're first getting started, or old and first getting started, plan on not really reaping the benefits of what can happen, which is you can turn this into a very well-paying job. But it takes time. It takes a lot of time to get to that point. I didn't really make any money to speak of the first 10 years, although I was getting paid a little bit. I made $200 a week for that. I told you about that bar band that I worked for, $200 a week. And I was working hard, moving PA, lighting, setting it up every day, putting in a truck, driving the truck overnight to the next gig, sleeping in the cab, getting up, doing it again, doing it $200 a week. And that was a while ago, but $200 a week even then was not much money. So, but I was getting incredible experience.
So the last thing is just if there's a book, a resource, a tool, a routine that has been helpful for you over your career.
Hmm. Um, the thing that has helped me, I'm a seat of the pants guy. I told you I didn't go to college immediately after getting out of high school. Book learning is difficult for me. Um, I don't have a recommendation for tour managing for any sort of a periodical or anything for that. There are many good books on sound out there, of which I've read none. But 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 I know for a fact that there's a lot of great authors out there with wonderful information. Be careful. Make sure that you do your homework when you start to read somebody, because there are also a lot of misinformation on pages. So be careful with YouTube sound guys and things like that, because it's a great tool. Many times I've gone to YouTube to find out individual little small things of like for a DAW that I'm working with, or a sound console, or a microphone. I want to see what other people think about it. You can use YouTube for that, and that's quite a good tool. I just used YouTube to try and fix my coffee maker, and it didn't work, but it worked the previous time. So, and the same thing, YouTube, as everyone knows, has got all kinds of content on there for all kinds of things, and that can be helpful when used sparingly, and not you're not it's not a Bible. You're not going to be able to learn how to be a great sound man by watching YouTube videos. What's going to do that for you is getting out there and doing it. That's why I said volunteer. Do anything you can to put yourself in the music. And if you continue to do that, people will notice, especially if you work really hard. um, Carry the guitar for the guitar player, put it away in the case if he's not adverse to you doing that. Uh, whatever it might be, driving the van for a band to get them, be the driver, be the loader, whatever it is, because once you get skills there, people will see that. People will either hire you for that, or they'll allow you to do more, because they say, oh, this guy's has been working hard for me, and I certainly haven't been paying him what he deserves. So all of that will go through your friends, family member, client's head at some point. It will, and it'll benefit you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being here with us today,
Yeah, Paul,
Paul.
thank you so much.
This has all been incredible insight. I'm sure it'll be very valuable for the listeners.
Great, great.
I
Well,
know this has been a masterclass for me.
well,
So
I've been trying
yeah,
not to drop too many names, but and say and always trying to say good things about those people. I apologize for anyone that was offended by me talking about Tony being very aggressive in his in his teachings to how to be a good tour manager. But that was a gift from God to me
Mm.
through him, and I can never repay that to him or to all of the clients that have taught me my job, um, and allow me to listen to the best music in the world every night.
Mm.
Not every night because I don't work 365 days a year, but I do probably 200, between 150 to 200 shows a year. I've slowed down. Um, and then I have other bands on the road at the same time. So then the amount of work that I do has increased from that. It's a challenge for my family because I'm busy but they know, my family knows about my passion for them and my love for my career and my job and how hard I've worked for it, and they understand that, and I'm blessed to have them and have that understanding.
Incredible. Paul, thank you so much. This has
Great.
been enlightening and inspiring, truly.
Cool. Well, I hope there's people out there that watch it and can take some nuggets with them, if there were any nuggets. And hey, I believe there's a way that you can continue this conversation with me, and I'm looking forward to that for all of you out there that want to do that.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. As Paul just said, you are able to book a one-on-one session with him to talk more about tour managing, get customized feedback on your own career, and get advice. All of this is available through our Meet the Pros service on our platform. We have not only Paul Boothe, but a list of other professionals across various fields such as management, agents, publicists to take advantage of. We recommend that you take the course, you learn, you get your questions and materials together ahead of time to get the most out of these sessions. But it really is a very valuable resource to be able to get customized feedback from professionals with so much experience. So, as I said, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to stick around our community for our monthly office hours Q&A sessions, more interviews coming down the way, and the other resources we have available to you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.